If you have recently started a nonprofit or you're thinking about starting a nonprofit, you're going to want to check out this live. I brought in Taimere Wood, B.O.S.S Nonprofit, to talk to us all about starting a nonprofit. We're going to talk about budgeting, paying yourself, bylaws, board of directors, everything that you're going to need to know. So with that, let's welcome Taimere. Hey, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I am super excited because you have a lot of knowledge around U.S. nonprofits, and I have a bit around Canadian nonprofits. So I think we can cover a pretty wide variety of viewers here.
Yes.
And why don't we just dive in and let's talk about starting a nonprofit in the U.S.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And so, of course, just want to make sure that everybody is aware that I love what you're doing in regards to turning your passion into reality and starting a nonprofit to really help the community based on, the audience that you want to serve. And so one of the things that I really want to touch bases on is really starting a nonprofit with the misconception that there's no money involved. And so just want to let everyone know that, of course, you don't necessarily have to utilize a consultant to be able to set up a nonprofit. But in order to actually maintain and start that nonprofit, that you'll have to pour some dollars into that. And so in regards to like the state and IRS proceedings. And so you want to make sure that you have the funding available to be able to pay for those filing fees.
Okay. And in Canada, it works quite different because you can have a nonprofit organization, which is super easy to set up. Each province is different, but you can't issue tax receipts. So you need to be a registered charitable organization in Canada, which is quite the process. Now, what about, we wanted to talk a little bit about paying yourself as well as a nonprofit. So what tips do you have around that?
Yes, absolutely. So one, you can absolutely pay yourself in your nonprofit, right? And so when you start out your nonprofit, you're usually like a one-man band outside of their board members that you've been able to secure. And so really being able to pay yourself out once you generate revenue for your organization, taking a step back if you are in a board capacity to a actual employee. And so it could be a situation where you step in as a program director or an executive director. And in that case, you will just be processing payroll in regards to like making sure that you are compliant with your particular state as well as the IRS, but you would just process payroll and make sure that your taxes are being paid out as well.
Okay. Yeah, same here in Canada. We have you can be an executive director, but if you're on a board, then you lose voting privileges. And it varies from province to province. But I know that's a big question that I get asked a lot: is can you pay yourself as a nonprofit leader?
Yes, absolutely. And just making sure that people are aware, because I am familiar with a couple of organizations where they operate in a full volunteer capacity. And there's nothing wrong with that because just based on the model of the organization, that could work for them. But when you are really like diving into the work of your organization, and let's say like you have a state contract or some large funding source where you have to meet those deliverables, making sure that if you're the person that is actually boots on the ground and doing the work, that you're compensating yourself for that.
Yeah. Yeah. And reasonable compensation. I know
Yes,
that's
absolutely. Right. When we definitely talking about the administrative expenses against your programmatic expenses, making sure that your salary makes sense based on your organization budget.
And budgeting. That's another big question that we get quite a bit.
Absolutely. And what I definitely recommend to nonprofits is really setting up your expenses into 3 buckets of money. And that would be administrative or your operations costs, your overhead, your programmatic expenses, so the actual direct costs that you are expending in regards to the programs that you're implementing in the community, as well as any fundraising expenses. So what are you actually doing to bring revenue into your organization?
Yeah, we talked a little bit before we started recording about how we have a foundation, and before anyone asks, it supports addiction and family violence in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
But I look at the cost of fundraising. I look at the financials before we make a donation because I want to see how much is the program expenses, how much is the admin, how much is the cost of fundraising.
Yes, absolutely. And making sure that you take into account all of that because you're not the only one. Of course, these corporate sponsors and funders and state contracts are definitely looking at that as well. Because, like we had talked about before, just making sure that your administrative expenses align with your organization budget. And so, just making sure that you have those proper channels and procedures in place to make sure that you're allocating your funding and your revenue in the way that you told your donors that you're actually going to expend those funds.
Yeah. And
Absolutely.
another big question that I get asked is around bylaws when you're setting up an organization.
Yes. And so just understanding the difference of there are two legal documents that you need in order to set up your organization in the United States. Not necessarily familiar with Canada, but in the United States, you definitely need your articles of incorporation and you need your bylaws. These are two corporation are just that. It's your legal document saying that you are incorporating this organization in your state. The bylaws are set up a little bit differently. Your bylaws really talk about how you're going to govern and operate your organization. So, how many board members is your organization going to have? What are their responsibilities, and outlining additional committees that your board members might join? Being able to really understand what your mission and your vision of your organization and how you plan to operate your organization in the community, as well as a really big piece in regards to the IRS eyes is really just making sure that you have a dissolution clause in your bylaws as well. And so what that really means is if your organization decides to break down and dissolve, there needs to be a procedure in place in order to make sure that you dissolve the organization and any assets or revenue that the organization has, that you have a proper procedure in place to make sure either A, you are dispersing that to another organization or just passing along to another organization.
Hmm. Is there a website or any resources that are available that have samples of these? So I know in Canada that our website is fantastic. The government of Canada has one, and you can download all of your forms. They even have sample bylaws that you can use and just edit to your own use. Is there anything like that here?
Yes, absolutely. I think there are a lot of resources that are available online for you to either A, just acquire additional information in regards to how to set up a nonprofit in your particular state, because of course we also know that states have different requirements, but then also just being able to really understand what it looks like in regards to that process to the IRS. And so one, I will say definitely visit the IRS website. It definitely aligns with being able to break down what those steps and procedures you're going to take in order to achieve that 501c3 status, but then also making sure that you locate your state's entity, depending on what your particular state is and who you apply to. They also have some additional resources on their website in regards to the process for their particular state and their requirements, as well as any actual templates that you can use for your articles of incorporation or your bylaws. Now, depending on the particular state that you're located in, it could be a situation where you're actually building out your articles of incorporation in their physical application. But some states require you to already have it ready to go and upload it in the application as you are submitting it. So it just all depends on the particular state that you're located in.
Okay. Yeah, much like Canada, it really depends on the province that you're in. Now,
Right.
you had mentioned board of directors. Do you have to have a board directors?
Yes. And so back to state, it all depends. I've seen a minimum of one board member and I've seen a minimum of three board members. So you're definitely going to have to do your due diligence to really do some research to identify how many board members meets the minimum for your state. But then in regards to the IRS actually requires for you to have three. So I always just say rule of thumb, at least make sure that you have a minimum of three board members. And that stems from your executive committee. So you want to make sure that you have a board chair, a board secretary, and a board treasurer. Each particular position have different sets of responsibilities in order to make sure that they are governing your organization and powering your organization in order to implement your mission into the community. So rule of thumb, three board members. But in regards to the max, there isn't necessarily a max number of board members. Like there isn't any law or legal compliance that says that you have to have a max of 25. What I will say is, depending on the capacity of your organization, really take that into account as you establish what the max is going to be. also establish what the capacity for yourself is going to be in regards to managing those board members. When we're talking about fundraising on behalf of the organization, board meetings and voting on different things that happen within your organization. So make sure the max number is aligned with the capacity of your organization.
We just did a video on creating superhero boards. So I'm going to link that at the end of this, because a board, I was always taught in fundraising that a board has their fiduciary duty, but they also have a duty to help fundraise. They're not just there to govern, that they're there to support and be ambassadors. And I know so many nonprofits that struggle with their board that aren't involved, that barely show up to the meetings. And I understand most are volunteers. Now I know in Canada we can pay our board. There's some very certain rules around it. How about in the US?
So in the US, your board members should operate in a volunteer capacity.
That's is that the doorbell?
Of course it is. But just to get to my last point, so really operating in a volunteer capacity. You don't want to necessarily pay your board members, especially as it relates to a conflict of interest in being on the board and operating your organization. And so if it's a situation where your board members want to step maybe in an employment role so that they can take a step back from being a part of your board and doing away with voting rights, then that will be the capacity to pay your board members. But just in a, as long as they're on your board, they should be operating in a volunteer capacity, as well as helping your organization fundraise. So just making sure that you align yourself and align your organization with board members that can make those connections out in the community, can make those soft asks, can make those soft introductions for you. So that way that you can actually secure the funding for your organization. But your board should be a working board. They should be working alongside you throughout your entire fiscal year. And that is in regards to fundraising.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I've never seen a paid board member in my entire career.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Well, that answers all the questions that we had. Was there anything else that you wanted to add before we wrap up? I don't see any questions in the comments. We've got you've got a nice compliment in the comments, though.
Yes, thank you. I definitely appreciate that. Not necessarily at this time do I have anything to add, unless there's anyone out there that has any additional questions.
Okay. Well, we're going to put your contact information in the description so anyone can reach out to you. You're on Instagram, I know, because we're connected on there.
Absolutely.
So I'll make sure to leave all that information if anyone wants to reach out to you.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate this opportunity.
Yeah. No, thank you. And that video for boards will pop up next.
Okay.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.